There is nothing wrong with your television set, but what you're about to see might change how you remember one of the most haunting shows of the 1960s. Before Star Trek, before modern sci-fi, there was The Outer Limits, a series that didn't just tell stories, it unsettled audiences with ideas about science, fear, and the unknown. Behind its most unforgettable episodes were intense production pressures, groundbreaking special effects, and secrets that even longtime fans never knew. Today, we're going inside 10 of some of the most iconic episodes and the surprising stories behind them, including one episode that sparked controversy for pushing an idea television wasn't quite ready for. When The Outer Limits premiered on ABC in 1963, it immediately stood apart. Created by Leslie Stevens, who brought in Joseph Stefano during a late-night phone call along with Lou Morheim, the show was shaped largely by Stevens and Stefano as its central creative force, much like Rod Serling on The Twilight Zone. From the very beginning, each episode pulled viewers in with a cold open or preview, followed by that unmistakable, almost Orwellian narration.
For the next hour, we will control all that you see and hear.
The voice belonged to Vic Perrin, known as the Control Voice. Perrin, who had worked in radio on shows like Dragnet and Gunsmoke, had trained in a speech workshop led by Charles Laughton, giving him that precise, commanding delivery. He became a major part of the show's identity, and remarkably, could record 4 or 5 episodes in just a couple of hours. The stories themselves pushed boundaries. Episodes were often philosophical, layered with social and political commentary, and centered on the risks and ethics of science. Its hour-long format also helped attract more established actors who typically avoided television, giving the show a more cinematic feel. It almost had a very different name. The original title, Please Stand By, was rejected because the network felt it was too dystopian, especially with Cold War tensions still high after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Behind the scenes, Stevens often struggled with having to simplify ideas for a broader audience, balancing ambition with network expectations. Still, viewers were hooked. Some were so determined not to miss an episode, they would even take their television sets with them just to keep watching. A big part of that appeal came from its visuals. Every episode required something new, handled by Projects Unlimited, one of the first true special effects companies in television. Led by Wah Ming Chang, Gene Warren, and Tim Barr, the team worked like a creative workshop. Artists moved between roles, with young talents like Ralph Rodin, Paul LeBaron, and Jim Danforth, each just 23 years old, handling everything from props to matte paintings, often earning on-screen credit alongside the lead actors. The pressure was constant. With around $10,000 per episode for effects, Stefano once noted that a single monster suit could cost $7,000 to $8,000, more than the entire cast budget on many shows. And unlike later series, The Outer Limits needed something new every single week. Despite its ambition, the show faced challenges. After its first season, it was moved against Jackie Gleason's variety show, hurting ratings, and it was canceled midway through its second season. It would later be revived from 1995 to 2002, with rumors of another reboot years later. But during its original run, it delivered some of the most unforgettable science fiction ever put on television, and it all began with The Galaxy Being. The very first episode, The Galaxy Being, which first aired on September 16, 1963, was written and directed by Leslie Stevens himself, instantly setting the tone for the series. Shot in just 9 days on a $213,000 budget, it blends speculative science fiction with human drama and philosophical reflection. Inspired by The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951, it taps directly into humanity's fear of technology and the unknown during the height of Cold War tensions. The episode features Cliff Robertson as scientist Alan Maxwell, alongside Lee Phillips as his brother Gene Buddy Maxwell, Jacqueline Scott as their sister Carol, and Burt Metcalf as Eddie Phillips. At the center of it all is the alien itself, a nitrogen-based, higher-dimensional being. Physically portrayed by mime William O. Douglas Jr. and voiced by Stevens himself, the creature was brought to life using a simple but striking effect. A wetsuit coated in oil and glycerin, filmed and reversed using an image negative to create a glowing, otherworldly presence. Its distorted voice, produced through a vacuum, would go on to become the sonic blueprint for nearly every alien in the series. The story begins with Alan conducting secret experiments at the radio station, using its power to study microwave background noise through a custom-built device. During one of these experiments, he makes unexpected contact with a being from the Andromeda Galaxy, one that appears on his 3-dimensional screen and communicates through thought. Using his computer, Alan translates the being's thought patterns into English, and the two begin exchanging ideas about life, death, and the nature of the universe. The being explains it is a nitrogen-based life form from a dimension where there is no death, where war is forbidden, and where contact with Earth is restricted because humanity is seen as dangerous. But the experiment is unstable, and both sides are breaking rules to make contact. When Alan leaves the station, he warns that the station's signal power must not be increased. Instead, Eddie Phillips, filling in at the station, pushes the signal to full strength, unintentionally pulling the being into our world as a physical electromagnetic presence. What follows are immediate and dangerous consequences. The being's radiation begins to affect everything around it, killing Eddie and injuring others simply by coming into contact with them. As panic spreads and authorities move in, the situation quickly escalates beyond anyone's control. Alan eventually manages to communicate with the being directly, convincing it to reduce its energy. But as tensions rise, fear takes over. During the confrontation, Carol is accidentally shot, only to be healed by the being's radiation, revealing that its power is not purely destructive. When authorities attempt to destroy it, the being defends itself, even stopping bullets in mid-air. In the end, it destroys the transmitter as a warning, urging humanity to reflect on what it does not yet understand. Rather than return home after breaking its own laws, the being chooses to fade out of our world entirely, leaving behind a final message and a lingering question about humanity's place in the universe. Behind the scenes, the episode was a technical proving ground. Hua Ming Chang and the Projects Unlimited team created every effect, from the alien itself to the transceiver and visual distortions, pushing far beyond typical television budgets. Their work paid off immediately. On the same day the pilot was screened, ABC executives greenlit the series. Most importantly, the galaxy being established a recurring theme in The Outer Limits. The curious, intelligent outsider met not with understanding, but with fear. The Sixth Finger, the 5th episode aired, but the 11th filmed, captures The Outer Limits at its most ambitious, even under tight constraints. Directed by James Goldstone and written by Ellis St. Joseph in his only contribution to the series, the episode was photographed by John Nicholas, maintaining the show's distinct visual style. At its core, the story explores evolution, both scientific and philosophical, drawing from George Bernard Shaw's Back to Methuselah. It was reportedly the first script Joseph Stefano read and immediately approved, with a simple note: film it. The episode features David McCallum as Gwillem Griffiths, alongside Edward Mulhare as Professor Mathers, Jill Hayworth as Kathy Evans, and Nora Marlowe as Mrs. Ives. The story takes place in a remote Welsh mining town, where Professor Mathers, burdened by guilt over his role in developing a powerful atomic weapon, begins experimenting with accelerated human evolution in hopes of benefiting mankind. Gwillem Griffiths, a frustrated and resentful miner, volunteers for the experiment. What begins as a controlled process quickly escalates as his transformation accelerates far beyond expectations, advancing him tens of thousands and eventually millions of years ahead of humanity. As his intelligence increases, so does his physical form. His skull expands, his hairline recedes, and eventually, he develops a sixth finger on each hand. As his mind continues to evolve, Gwillem develops powerful mental abilities, including telekinesis, and begins to see those around him as primitive. At one point, he lashes out at what he sees as human ignorance, but just as quickly, he evolves beyond anger itself, abandoning any desire for revenge or power. Instead, he becomes focused on something far greater, the idea of shedding the physical form entirely and existing as pure thought. Determined to continue evolving, Gwillem turns to Kathy Evans for help in pushing the experiment even further. But at the last moment, out of love, she reverses the process, bringing him back to his human state. The reversal, however, is too much for his body to withstand, and Gwillem slowly succumbs to its effects. Visually, Gwillem's transformation is one of the episode's most striking elements, and among the most elaborate ever created for the series. Makeup artist John Chambers, who would later win an Academy Award for Planet of the Apes in 1968, began by creating a life mask of McCallum, then designed 3 progressive evolutionary stages. McCallum worked closely with Chambers, requesting that his mouth, cheekbones, and eyes remain as visible as possible to preserve expression and avoid the stiffness often associated with heavy prosthetics. Early designs for the final stage even included exaggerated, bulging eyes, an idea that was ultimately abandoned. The process itself was demanding, requiring about 3 hours of makeup each day, with the final stage wearable for only a few hours. Some of the most memorable effects were created under tight time constraints. During the piano sequence, makeup artist Freddie Phillips improvised the bud of Gwilym's sixth finger, assembling it in about 20 minutes with spirit gum, cotton, and sealer, simply because the finger had not yet been made for the scene. That piano scene became the emotional centerpiece of the episode. It was suggested by McCallum himself, inspired by his father's background as a touring musician. Stefano expanded the idea into a full sequence, with McCallum miming simplified preludes he could learn quickly, creating a moment that visually reinforces the connection between evolution and mathematical precision. Production design leaned heavily on limitation. Filming on MGM lots, combined with stock footage, resulted in minimal sets and stark lighting, giving the episode a theatrical, almost abstract feel that complements its introspective tone. Censorship also played a significant role. ABC objected to direct references to Darwinism, with network censor Dorothy Brown raising concerns about what she described as the promotion of evolution. Several lines were removed, and the production held multiple discussions with the network over how far the theme could go, arguing that evolving into the future was central to science fiction, especially at a time when works like Inherit the Wind had recently brought the debate into the public spotlight. The original ending was far more extreme. Early versions had Gwilym regressing through multiple stages of life, first into an ape, then an amphibious reptile, then a gilled sea creature struggling on the floor, before finally dissolving into a protoplasmic jelly-like form. At one point, the ending even considered having him reappear as an actual monkey rather than an actor. But the network ultimately rejected these ideas, concerned that such a direct portrayal of human evolution could conflict with the religious beliefs of many viewers and risk backlash from both audiences and sponsors. Budget limitations had already forced major cuts. 5 characters removed and entire sequences condensed, including an earlier concept in which Gwilym evolves further and survives through photosynthesis. Instead, the story was reshaped into a more contained and personal conflict. When the episode first aired in 1963, its intensity stood out. In some markets, it was accompanied by a parental guidance warning, reflecting concerns about both its imagery and its themes. Some of the techniques developed here would have a lasting impact. Elements of makeup and effects work from The Outer Limits would later carry over into 1960s television, including techniques used in this episode that contributed to the development of pointed ears later seen on Star Trek. And yet, despite all of these constraints, The Sixth Finger remains one of the series' most thought-provoking episodes. It's a powerful example of The Outer Limits doing more with less, combining performance, visual ingenuity, and big philosophical ideas into something that still feels far ahead of its time. The episode's concept of artificially accelerated evolution, along with the idea of a human mind expanding beyond the limits of the body, would later echo in science fiction stories for decades, including films like 1992's The Lawnmower Man. The Man Who Was Never Born. The 6th episode aired, but the 12th filmed, continues The Outer Limits exploration of how science fiction could carry deep emotional weight. Directed by Leonard Horn and written by Anthony Lawrence, the episode was envisioned as a romantic fairy tale, a tone rarely seen on television at the time. Cinematography by Conrad Hall transforms the episode into something almost dreamlike. Soft filters, lens diffusion, and carefully staged lighting give every frame a hazy, ethereal quality. Faces appear softened, environments feel suspended in time, and the story carries a fragile, almost unreal atmosphere. Director Leonard Horn further emphasized this effect by using point-of-view camera shifts between Andro's true, mutated form and the illusion of his human appearance, subtly reinforcing the contrast between perception and reality. The episode features Martin Landau as Andro, alongside Shirley Knight as Noelle Anderson, with John Considine as Lieutenant Bertram Cabot and Carl Held as astronaut Joseph Reardon. The story begins when astronaut Joseph Reardon is pulled through a time warp and returns to Earth, only to find himself nearly 2 centuries in the future. The world he encounters is desolate, and humanity is on the brink of extinction. There, he meets Andro, a lone survivor, physically mutated but intellectually refined. Andro reveals that Earth's downfall was caused by a man who has not yet been born, Bertram Cabot Jr., whose experiments with an alien virus led to the destruction of the human race. Determined to prevent that future, Reardon attempts to return to the past through the same time warp, bringing Andro with him as proof of what lies ahead. But during the journey, Reardon begins to fade from existence, disappearing before they arrive, leaving Andro alone to complete the mission. Now in the year 1963, Andro uses his ability to appear human as he searches for the source of the future catastrophe. He soon discovers that Cabot Jr. has not yet been born, and that the key to stopping him lies with Noelle Anderson, the woman who will one day become his mother. As Andro grows closer to Noelle, what begins as a mission becomes something far more complicated. He falls in love with her, and she, in turn, sees beyond his altered form, recognizing the humanity beneath it. Faced with an impossible choice, Andro ultimately abandons violence. Instead of killing Cabot's father, Noelle chooses to go with Andro into the future, ensuring that Cabot Jr. will never be born. But that choice comes at a cost. By altering the timeline, Andro erases his own existence. As the future begins to change, he slowly fades away, leaving Noelle alone, suspended between love, loss, and a reality that no longer remembers him. Andro is a uniquely layered character, alien in appearance, but grounded in a deeply human performance. His appearance retains expressive features around the eyes and mouth, allowing Martin Landau to deliver a performance filled with nuance and restraint, even beneath prosthetic makeup. 5 years earlier, Landau had even taught an acting class attended by Shirley Knight, adding an interesting dynamic to their on-screen connection. Wearing the Andro mask proved physically difficult. It fit poorly and made breathing challenging, a reminder that, at the time, performer comfort was often secondary to achieving the desired effect. That discomfort, however, contributes to the character's fragile, almost strange presence on screen. The concept of time convulsion allows Andro to move across time, but it also raises deeper questions about fate and causality. What happens when a future is prevented, and what is lost in the process? The final moments are among the most haunting in the series. As the spacecraft drifts into the future, Noelle is left alone, and in a striking, almost abstract image, she becomes a solitary figure against the vastness of time itself. An originally planned scene showing her awakening in the distant future was ultimately removed, strengthening the ambiguity and emotional impact of the ending. Andro remains one of the Outer Limits' most tragic figures, caught between time, identity, and love. And the episode stands as a powerful example of the series at its best, where science fiction is not just about the future, but about the human cost of changing it. The Zanti Misfits, the 14th episode aired, but the 17th filmed, earned a place on TV Guide's list of the 100 greatest television episodes, ranking at number 98. Directed by Leonard Horn, the episode showcases his consistent visual style, blending suspense, dramatic tension, and practical effects. Joseph Stefano, serving as showrunner for the first season, wrote the teleplay under tight deadlines. His scripts helped define the series' identity, combining existential themes with psychological tension and memorable narration. Cinematographer John Nicholas gives the episode a stark, high-contrast look, enhancing its eerie and suspenseful tone. Alien voices were provided by Robert Cleveland Johnson, who improvised many of his lines at the last minute, adding an unpredictable and unsettling quality to the Zanti creatures. The episode features Michael Tolan as Professor Graves, alongside Olive Deering as Lisa, Robert F. Simon as General Hart, Bruce Dern as the fugitive Ben Garth, with Claude Woolman and Bill Hart in supporting roles. The story unfolds in a remote desert ghost town, appropriately named Morgue, California, where military forces have sealed off the area in preparation for an extraordinary event. The planet Zanti has chosen Earth as the site to dispose of its criminal population under strict conditions. No human is to witness the landing, and any interference will be met with total destruction. The base commander assures the Zanti that the area is secure, insisting that no one will be allowed to enter the restricted zone under any circumstances. But that assurance doesn't last for long. As the military prepares for the landing, two unexpected intruders complicate the situation. Fugitive bank robber Ben Garth and his companion, Lisa, crash through the security perimeter, killing a guard in the process, and unknowingly place themselves directly in the path of the alien encounter. When the Zanti ship arrives, the situation quickly escalates. The creatures, grotesque ant-like beings with disturbingly human faces, emerge and immediately react to the perceived violation of their agreement. Ben is killed after approaching the ship, and the fragile balance between the Zanti and the military begins to collapse. What follows is a sudden and violent confrontation. The Zanti prisoners seize control of their transport and attack, forcing the military into a desperate response. A chaotic firefight erupts, and the creatures are ultimately destroyed. But the real revelation comes after the battle. Rather than retaliate, the Zanti leaders deliver a chilling message. They explained that they are incapable of executing their own kind, and instead chose Earth because humanity has no such hesitation. In their eyes, humans are not victims, but something far more unsettling, a species already accustomed to carrying out destruction. Visually, the episode leaves a lasting impression through its creature design and effects work. The Zanti were brought to life through stop-motion animation by Al Hamm, known for his work on Mighty Joe Young. Designed by Hua Ming Chang, the creatures combine insect-like bodies with eerily human facial features, creating a deeply unsettling hybrid. Their movement is deliberately unnatural, jerky and mechanical, adding to their alien presence. Their voices, performed by Robert Cleveland Johnson and Vic Perrin, were further manipulated through pitch shifting by John Elizalde, while amplified insect-like sounds enhanced their menace. Leonard Horn's direction reinforces the alien perspective in subtle ways. In one striking visual moment, the body of Ben is positioned in a way that mirrors an insect, suggesting how humanity itself might appear through the eyes of the Zanti. The setting also plays a key role. Filmed on MGM's western backlot, the abandoned town of Morgue becomes more than just a location. It serves as a symbolic stage where judgment is passed, reinforcing the episode's themes of morality and consequence. Even small production details reflect the show's resourcefulness. Sets and props, including the control room console, would later be reused in other episodes such as OBIT, demonstrating how the series maximized its budget while maintaining a distinctive visual identity. The episode closes as it began, with the Morgue Town sign, creating a quiet but effective visual bookend. The Zanti Misfits stands as one of the most unsettling entries in the series, not because of what the aliens do, but because of what they reveal. In the end, the true subject of judgment is not the creatures from another world, but humanity itself. The Belero Shield? The 20th episode aired, but the 23rd filmed. And the final episode of Season 1 takes a different approach, favoring myth, light, and emotion over horror or spectacle. Directed by John Brom in his second and final The Outer Limits episode, he brought experience from The Twilight Zone and shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., emphasizing character interaction and visual storytelling over rigid exposition. Joseph Stefano adapted the teleplay from Lou Morheim's discovery of Arthur Leo Zagat's 1936 story, The Lanson Screen. He infused the material with layers of mythological and religious symbolism, shaping the alien into a spiritual, almost mythic figure, drawing parallels to Bellerophon, Norse mythology, and Christ-like imagery. The episode features Martin Landau as Richard Bellero, alongside Sally Kellerman as Judith Bellero, Cheetah Rivera as Mrs. Dane, John Hoyt as the Bifrost alien, and Neil Hamilton as Richard Bellero Sr. Richard Bellero is a scientist struggling under the weight of his father's expectations. His father demands not just success, but greatness, something that will make the Bellero name immortal. Money means nothing to him, only legacy and power. Caught between that pressure and his wife's ambition, Richard is outmatched on both sides. Judith Bellero is not driven by wealth, but by something far more dangerous, a desire for power, prestige, and transcendence. She speaks of what she calls the trembling way, a vision of something beyond human limits, echoing the mythic bridge between worlds. Even within the household, something feels off. Mrs. Dane, their devoted servant, moves with a quiet intensity, loyal, observant, and almost unnervingly detached. Everything changes when Richard fires his experimental laser into the sky. An alien lifeform, bioluminescent and peaceful, follows the beam back to Earth, arriving inside the Bellero home. The Bifrost being comes from a realm just beyond human perception and carries a small device capable of generating an impenetrable energy shield. Unlike Judith, Richard responds with curiosity, forming an immediate intellectual connection with the being. But Judith sees something else entirely: opportunity. When the being refuses to share the shield technology, recognizing the danger in her intentions, Judith manipulates the situation. After gaining his trust, she tricks him into lowering the shield and shoots him, hiding the body with Mrs. Dane's help. With Richard sent away to retrieve his father, Judith prepares to reveal her discovery. When they return, she demonstrates the shield's power, allowing weapons to be fired at her without harm. But when she attempts to deactivate it, something goes wrong. The shield will not come down. Trapped inside an invisible barrier, Judith begins to suffocate, cut off from the world by the very force she sought to control. As panic spreads, Mrs. Dane returns to the cellar, only to discover that the Bifrost alien is still alive. Weak but compassionate, he responds not with anger, but with mercy. Using the last of his strength and his own glowing blood as the energy source, he disables the shield, saving Judith's life before dying. But the true consequence is not physical. Even after the barrier disappears, Judith remains convinced she is still trapped inside it, unable to escape what has now become a prison of her own making. That guilt echoes a much older story. Judith's ruthless ambition, her psychological unraveling, and even the image of the stain that will not leave her hand closely parallel Macbeth, particularly Lady Macbeth's descent into madness. Like her Shakespearean counterpart, she is undone not by external forces, but by the weight of her own actions. And unlike Macbeth, Richard himself shows none of that same hunger for power or brutality, making Judith's ambitions stand in stark contrast. Visually, the episode achieves its unique tone through subtle but effective techniques. Bifrost's radiance was created using practical, in-camera effects, including Vaseline applied to glass in front of the lens and carefully controlled lighting to produce a soft, glowing aura. Even the technology seen on screen reflects the production's ingenuity. The laser device used in the episode would later be repurposed as a teleportation unit in The Mice, demonstrating the show's ability to reuse and adapt its resources creatively. Performance plays a central role in the episode's impact. Cheetah Rivera's fluid, almost cat-like movement contrasts with Sally Kellerman's controlled but increasingly unstable portrayal of Judith, creating a dynamic that carries much of the story's emotional weight. The episode builds not toward spectacle, but toward something quieter and more unsettling. Its final twist is delivered with one of the shortest closing narrations in the series, just 19 words, leaving the audience with a lingering sense of ambiguity. The Bellero Shield stands as a striking example of the outer limits at its most restrained, where light, performance, and theme replace traditional science fiction spectacle. And in the end, the most powerful force is not the alien technology, but the human desire to control it. Next is a feasibility study. The 29th episode aired, but the 9th filmed, delayed by ABC for 8 months over concerns about its disturbing subject matter, particularly involving children and the episode's original ending. That ending, which portrayed the characters more explicitly as martyrs, was rejected, leading to a quieter but ultimately more powerful resolution. Directed by Byron Haskin, known for his visual precision and pacing, with cinematography by John Nicholas, the episode creates a stark contrast between suburban normalcy and an alien world. Joseph Stefano considered it the most humanitarian script of the series, focusing less on spectacle and more on philosophy, morality, and human choice. The episode features Sam Wanamaker as Dr. Simon Holm, alongside Phyllis Love as Andrea Holm, David Opatoshu as Ralph Cashman, Joyce Van Patten as Rhea, and Frank Puglia as Father Fontana. The alien authority was voiced by British actor Ben Wright, while first assistant director Robert Justman physically portrayed the character after Wright was unable to fit into the mask. It begins on an ordinary Sunday morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Midgard Drive, where everyday concerns unfold between neighbors, couples, and routines. But something is wrong. A dense, unnatural fog rolls in. One by one, the residents encounter something they cannot explain. Figures in the mist, distorted voices, and a growing sense that their world is no longer what it seems. Then, without warning, everything changes. An entire 6-block neighborhood, homes, people, and all, is transported to an alien world known as Luminos. There, the truth is revealed. The Luminoids are a dying race, afflicted by a genetic condition that slowly turns them into immobile, rock-like beings. Unable to sustain themselves, they have begun searching the galaxy for a suitable species to serve as their labor force. Humanity is being tested. The abduction is not random, it is an experiment. A feasibility study to determine whether the human race can be controlled, contained, and ultimately enslaved. The Luminoids promise security, comfort, stability, but at a cost: freedom. As the survivors begin to understand their situation, the horror becomes psychological rather than physical. There are no chains, no visible torture, only the quiet certainty that their lives will no longer be their own. And there is something worse. Contact with the Luminoids spreads a disease that transforms the human body into the same immobile, rock-like state, making even survival uncertain. Faced with this reality, the group gathers to decide what comes next. Simon Holm emerges as a voice of reason and resistance. He explains the stakes clearly. If even a portion of humanity proves compliant, the Luminoids will move forward with enslaving the entire planet. But there is still a choice. They can submit, or they can resist. And resistance will come at the highest possible cost. In one of the series' most powerful moments, the group makes a collective decision. Rather than allow themselves to become tools of their captors, they choose to render the experiment useless. One by one, they join hands, knowingly exposing themselves to the disease, not as an act of despair, but as an act of defiance. In doing so, they ensure that humanity cannot be enslaved. The experiment fails. Abduction of human race? Infeasible. Visually, the episode relies on atmosphere rather than elaborate effects. The Luminoids themselves are kept partially obscured, massive, rock-like forms emerging from fog and shadow, enhancing their presence through suggestion rather than detail. Makeup effects depicting the disease were achieved through simple but effective techniques, creating unsettling transformations without the need for complex prosthetics. The contrast between the familiar suburban setting and the alien environment reinforces the episode's central idea that the threat is not just physical, but philosophical. At its core, a feasibility study is about choice. The Luminoids believe humans will submit, that fear of death will outweigh the desire for freedom. But what they fail to understand is something uniquely human: the capacity for sacrifice, the willingness to choose meaning over survival, and the understanding that even in the face of certain death, there is still freedom in choosing how to face it. A feasibility study remains one of the most profound episodes of The Outer Limits, not because of what it shows, but because of what it asks. What would you choose? We begin Season 2 with Soldier. The first episode aired, but the second filmed, marking a shift toward larger-scale storytelling and more visually ambitious science fiction. Directed by Gerd Oswald, one of Joseph Stefano's most trusted collaborators, the episode reflects the series' move toward broader scope and more complex themes. The episode features Michael and Sarah as Quarlo Klebregny, alongside Lloyd Nolan as linguist Tom Kagan, with Vic Perrin and Tim O'Connor providing the voices heard through Quarlo's helmet. The story opens on a battlefield, nearly 1,800 years in the future, an endless war fought on a devastated Earth where soldiers are bred for a single purpose: to kill. Quarlo Klebregny is one of them. Locked in combat with an enemy soldier, their weapons collide, creating a time vortex that tears both men out of their world. Quarlo is thrown into the year 1964, while his enemy becomes trapped in a suspended temporal state. Alone in a world he cannot understand, Quarlo reacts the only way he knows how: with violence and suspicion. He is quickly captured and brought under government control, where linguist Tom Kagan is tasked with communicating with him. At first, Quarlo's speech, an evolved, fragmented form of English, seems impossible to understand. But slowly, Kagan begins to translate. What emerges is unsettling. Quarlo is not just a soldier. He is the result of generations of war. Raised in hatcheries, conditioned from birth, he has never known anything but conflict. Kagan believes something more might still exist beneath that conditioning. Against the wishes of the authorities, he brings Quarlo into his home, introducing him to something completely foreign: family. For the first time, Quarlo encounters trust, routine, and a world without enemies. Even small moments, like his cautious interaction with the family cat Macbeth, suggest something beginning to change. But that fragile progress doesn't last. The enemy soldier escapes the time vortex and arrives in 1964, tracking Quarlo with the same relentless instinct. The war has followed him. It ends where it began. At Kagan's home, the two soldiers confront each other in a final, brutal struggle. Weapons fire. Instinct takes over. And in a single burst of energy, both are destroyed, leaving behind only one question: did Quarlo die as he was created, or did he choose to protect the people who showed him another way to live? Behind the scenes, Soldier reflects the series' growing ambition. The futuristic battlefield was constructed on Paramount's massive Sunset stage, spanning 3 sound stages, with a distant horizon created using miniature mountains, fog effects, and matte paintings to enhance scale and depth. Cinematographer Kenneth Peach crafted dynamic visuals that often place the viewer inside Quarlo's perspective, reinforcing his disorientation and isolation. The teleplay was written by Harlan Ellison, based on his own 1957 short story, Soldier from Tomorrow. He was paid $5,000 for the episode, but not without frustration. A planned romantic subplot was removed during production to streamline the narrative, something Ellison felt reduced the story's emotional depth. Production design also reflects the show's resourcefulness. Quarlo's battle helmet would later be reused as the helmet worn by Mork in Mork and Mindy, a small but memorable example of how these productions repurposed their creations. The episode also carries a legacy beyond the series itself. Harlan Ellison would later point to this story as partial inspiration for The Terminator, a connection that eventually led to a legal dispute, further cementing the episode's influence on one of science fiction's most recognized films. At its core, this episode asks a haunting question. If a man is created only to kill, can he ever choose to be anything else? Season 2's Demon with a Glass Hand, the 5th episode aired, but the 9th filmed, became the highest-rated episode of The Outer Limits. Series producer Ben Brady later called it the best of the season, praising its suspense and ingenuity, achieved without relying on traditional monster effects. Directed by Byron Haskin, the episode emphasizes tight framing, movement, and carefully staged action, allowing tension to build through performance and environment rather than spectacle. The episode stars Robert Culp as Trent, alongside Arlene Martel as Consuelo, with Abraham Safare and Rex Holman among the supporting cast. Trent is a man with no memory beyond the last 10 days. His left hand is not human, but a transparent, computer-like device missing 3 of its fingers. Until those missing pieces are restored, it cannot fully explain who he is, or why he is being hunted. And he is being hunted. Inside a vast, decaying office building, Trent is pursued by a group of alien beings known as the Kaiban. They have sealed off the structure from the outside world, turning it into a controlled environment, a maze of stairwells, corridors, and hidden vantage points. A trap. As Trent navigates this space, he encounters Consuelo, a woman trapped inside the building who becomes his only ally. Together, they try to survive long enough to uncover the truth. One by one, Trent recovers the missing fingers of his mechanical hand, and with each piece restored, the truth becomes harder to ignore. The Kaiban are not just hunting him, they followed him, from the future. As the final pieces fall into place, Trent learns the reality of his existence. He is not human, he is a machine, created to carry the encoded knowledge of the last surviving humans after Earth fell to the Kaiban in a future war that lasted only 19 days. A war humanity lost. The remaining survivors transferred their minds into him, making Trent both their protector and their final hope. The Kaiban, now dying from a plague unleashed during that war, have come back in time, searching for a cure, one hidden within Trent himself. In the end, Trent defeats them, destroying their ability to remain in the past. But victory comes with a disturbing consequence. With his purpose finally revealed, he is left with an unimaginable task: to wait. 1,200 years, alone, until the moment comes to restore the human race. And as that realization settles in, something else becomes clear. The humanity he thought he had may never have been his to begin with. Behind the scenes, the episode is a showcase of creative efficiency and storytelling ingenuity. The entire story unfolds within a single location, the Bradbury Building in Los Angeles, whose towering staircases, ironwork, and layered architecture become an active part of the narrative. Elevators, corridors, and platforms were carefully choreographed to create tension and movement, turning the building itself into a character. That physical staging came with real risk. During production, stunt double Dean Smith, standing in for Culp, broke both of his ankles while performing a stairway jump, underscoring just how demanding those sequences were to film. The teleplay was written by Harlan Ellison, who developed a close friendship with Robert Culp during production. Ellison, known for his sharp wit, later remarked that he found Culp unusually intelligent, something he considered rare among actors. When the two first met on location at the Bradbury Building, Ellison loudly introduced himself and told Culp he had written the role specifically for him. Culp, in turn, considered it one of the finest scripts ever produced for television, later suggesting that both the episode and the series succeeded because they functioned as a kind of morality play, driven by ideas rather than spectacle. Ellison's script also carried a sense of myth beneath its science fiction. Drawing from ancient archetypes like the eternal man, the story places Trent in a role that is both futuristic and timeless, part machine, part guardian, and ultimately a solitary figure tasked with preserving humanity itself. Even the title itself reflects a bit of Ellison's defiance. Despite the name, there is no demon in the episode. The word was included to satisfy network expectations for a more traditional monster, what Ellison later described, with typical bluntness, as giving the suits what they wanted while quietly subverting it. Ellison's original script was far more expansive, including a much longer timeline and larger-scale action. But production constraints led to a more contained version, one that ultimately strengthened the episode's focus and intensity. Demon with a Glass Hand stands as one of the most enduring episodes of The Outer Limits, not because of what it shows, but because of what it leaves behind. A single figure, standing alone against time itself, waiting to bring humanity back. Season 2's I, Robot, the 9th episode aired, but the 11th filmed, takes a very different approach, shifting away from traditional science fiction spectacle and into courtroom drama and ethical inquiry. Directed by Leon Benson, his only contribution to The Outer Limits, the episode reflects a grounded, character-driven style shaped by his work on Perry Mason. The episode features Howard Da Silva as defense attorney Thurman Cutler, alongside Ford Rainey as district attorney Thomas Coyle, Mariana Hill as Nina Link, Leonard Nimoy as reporter Judson Ellis, and John Hoyt as Professor Hebel. Adam Link is unlike anything the world has seen before. A robot, accused of murder. Created by the reclusive scientist Dr. Charles Link, Adam is capable of learning, reasoning, and developing awareness at a remarkable pace. Like a child, he absorbs knowledge from books, trying to understand the world around him. But that understanding is incomplete. During one early encounter, Adam attempts to rescue a young girl, only to accidentally break her arm, unable to control his own strength. When Dr. Link is later found dead in his laboratory, killed in what appears to be a mechanical accident, Adam becomes the prime suspect. Circumstantial evidence is enough. He is arrested, put on trial, and judged. Despite the objections of Nina Link, who believes in his innocence, Adam is treated not as a sentient being, but as a dangerous machine. The trial becomes something more than a legal proceeding. It becomes a question. Can something created by man be considered alive? As testimony unfolds, Adam explains his actions with simple, logical clarity. Adam insists Dr. Link's death was an accident, that he was in another room when it happened. But in a courtroom ruled by fear, truth alone isn't enough. But fear outweighs reason, and the prosecution pushes that fear even further. In a calculated move, Adam's circuitry is tampered with, triggering a violent malfunction in the courtroom. The resulting chaos reinforces the very narrative being built against him. The verdict is inevitable: guilty. Adam is sentenced to be dismantled. But before that sentence can be carried out, something unexpected happens. As he is being transported, the same young girl he once injured wanders into the path of an oncoming truck. This time, Adam understands. Without hesitation, he breaks free, rushing forward to save her. He succeeds, but at the cost of his own existence. Struck by the vehicle, Adam is destroyed. And in that final act, the truth becomes undeniable. The machine on trial was more humane than those who judged him. Behind the scenes, iRobot reflects the series' continued shift toward idea-driven storytelling. The teleplay, written by Robert C. Dennis, was based on the Adam Link stories by Otto Binder, published under the name Eando Binder in Amazing Stories. The Binder brothers granted the production rights with the freedom to draw from across their body of work, allowing the episode to incorporate elements from multiple stories. The title itself carries an interesting history. It was taken from Isaac Asimov's well-known collection, despite his objections, though both works trace their inspiration back to the same original Adam Link stories. The episode also draws heavily from classic horror influences. Early sequences deliberately echo Frankenstein, including imagery of a young girl near water and the idea of a mob pursuing a misunderstood creation, reinforcing Adam's role as a tragic, misunderstood figure. Production took place under tighter budget constraints in Season 2, leading to practical solutions throughout. Adam Link's appearance was achieved through a rather underwhelming robot suit. In fact, no one at Projects Unlimited claimed responsibility for the design, leading effects artist Gene Warren to suggest the suit may have already existed in Paramount's prop department. The cast itself reflects that focus. Veteran actors bring weight and credibility to the material, while Leonard Nimoy's appearance offers an early glimpse of a performer who would soon become synonymous with science fiction. The episode also reflects its time. Themes of fear, bias, and the treatment of the other echo broader cultural tensions of the 1960s, turning the courtroom into a mirror of society itself. iRobot stands as one of the series' most direct moral statements, a story not about machines becoming human, but about whether humans are capable of recognizing humanity when they see it. Season 2's The Inheritors, the 24th and final episode filmed, presented as the 25th and 26th episodes aired, stands as one of the Outer Limits' most ambitious productions. Filmed after the core of the season was already underway, it represents the series at its peak, expanding in scale, complexity, and philosophical depth. Directed by Byron Haskin, who had already helmed episodes like Demon with a Glass Hand and A Feasibility Study, the production pushed the limits of what television science fiction could achieve at the time. The episode features Robert Duvall as Intelligence Officer Adam Ballard, alongside Steve Inat as Lieutenant Minz, with supporting performances that ground the story's global stakes in human emotion. It begins in the chaos of war. 4 soldiers, each wounded by bullets made from fragments of a meteorite, survive injuries that should have killed them. But survival is only the beginning. Something has changed. Their intelligence increases dramatically. Their behavior becomes focused, almost mechanical. And though separated by distance, they begin working toward a single, shared goal. Adam Ballard is assigned to investigate. What he finds is deeply unsettling. The men are no longer acting independently. They are connected, guided by an unseen intelligence. One by one, they begin constructing something strange, a ship. As Ballard digs deeper, the mystery grows darker. Children begin to disappear. Not random children, but those who are blind, deaf, physically disabled. the ones society has quietly overlooked. Ballard fears the worst: an invasion, an abduction, a harvest. By the time he locates the ship, it is already too late. A force field surrounds it, impenetrable, silent, absolute. And inside, the children are being prepared for departure. But the truth is not what he expects. Lieutenant Minz explains what has happened. The intelligence guiding them is not hostile, but dying. A distant, advanced civilization has reached the end of its existence. Unable to reproduce, they've searched the universe for a way to continue. And they have chosen humanity. Not the strong, not the powerful, but the forgotten. The children are not being taken as victims. They are being given something new, a chance. Within the ship, their conditions are already beginning to heal. Blindness fades, mobility returns. For the first time, they are being seen, not as burdens, but as potential, as inheritors. Faced with the truth, Ballard is given a choice: stop them or accept what he now understands. In the end, he steps aside. And as the ship departs, the question remains: was this an act of salvation, or something humanity simply wasn't ready to comprehend? Behind the scenes, The Inheritors represents one of the series' most complex productions. Large-scale sets, matte paintings, and miniatures expanded the episode's visual scope, but they were used with restraint. Rather than spectacle, the focus remained on performance, dialogue, and the ideas driving the story. That philosophy was intentional. Story editor C. Leg Lester pushed strongly for a different kind of science fiction, one built not on destruction, but on possibility. He fought with the network to preserve the idea of a benevolent invasion, rejecting the more conventional demand for monsters and conflict. Even ABC, initially resistant, ultimately recognized the strength of the concept once the script was complete. That same philosophy carried into the performances. Lieutenant Min's climactic speech in Part 2, one of the episode's most powerful moments, was not delivered exactly as written. Actor Steve Enott reshaped the dialogue in his own words, creating a spontaneous performance that reportedly left the entire set in silence. But this episode was not immune to its own set of production challenges. The production lacked the time and resources to convincingly show the spaceship lifting off. Instead, director Byron Haskin and cinematographer Kenneth Peach devised a practical solution, pulling the camera back and tilting upward toward the sky, allowing suggestion to replace what could not be shown. The result is an ending that feels less mechanical and more transcendent. The teleplay, developed under Leslie Stevens' creative direction, reflects the series' continued focus on philosophical science fiction, exploring not just alien encounters, but human response. And in that sense, The Inheritors feels less like a conclusion and more like a culmination, because it brings together everything the series has been building toward: fear of the unknown, the limits of human understanding, and the question of what it truly means to evolve. With these final episodes, The Outer Limits completes its 2-season run. Despite its creative success and a devoted audience, the series ultimately struggled with ratings and rising production costs. It simply wasn't generating enough revenue to sustain itself, and was canceled midway through its second season, bringing its original run to an abrupt close. So, what do you think? Did you agree with our list? Were there any Outer Limits episodes that stuck with you that we didn't cover? And thinking back, do you remember the first time you saw the show? Share your memories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more journeys into classic television. Thanks for watching.